Sure. So my name is Chris, and I've been doing PMing of one kind or another for 20 plus years in various capacities. And I've been a software engineer for, gosh, 40 years or so. The bulk of my PMing work has been technical work, so developer tools, services, ecosystems, that kind of thing. A mix of proprietary and open source. I prefer the open source work. For the last 3 or 4, well, I guess for probably the last half a dozen years, I've been exposed to AI of various kinds, and that has affected my job. We've been working to, investigate and incorporate AI. But when generative AI hit a couple of years ago, that kind of turned the tables on everything, including developer tools and services. And so everything is now being reset when it comes to my specific area. But in my experience, I also do consulting with applied AI kind of things. And I'm seeing that AI just upset the apple cart across every industry. And so there are some trends that I've been watching in my particular space that I'm happy to discuss, but mostly I'm curious where people are seeing AI pop up in their lives and how any troubles you have thinking about it, dealing with it, incorporating it, right, applying it, which is my specialty.
Awesome. Cool, fantastic. Why don't we go around with that prompt? So Liam, Angie, Alex, and Ali. Hey, Alex and Ali, welcome. And yeah, if there's places that you've seen AI pop up, and let's start there. So,
happy to jump in if we're just going around the horn. Yeah, my name is Liam. I was a product manager, am a product manager for the last 6-ish years or so. Was in ed tech and government before that, but mainly a PM in the insurance technology space. Main reason I was excited to join this call was to get your perspective on, I don't know, making it as easy as possible to adopt some of these AI tools, especially from a security and privacy and sort of data ownership perspective. The product that we're trying to sell into these agencies, we've got a good value prop for the core user and even the buyer. And I know I have a good value prop for the sort of IT operations, person at these larger companies, but I need to understand how to make it easy for them to verify we're secure, how to make it easy for them to onboard with us, how to make it easy for them to sort of own their data and see that. So anything that you've had experience with either before AI or in this sort of AI, in your AI experience recently, of how to sort of guarantee that, maximize it from an architecture standpoint or just a policy standpoint, would be interesting. So I hope that made sense, but that's why I'm excited to be here. So thanks for having this.
Awesome.
Hopefully the echo is better now. Awesome.
Yeah, you fixed it.
Cool. I am Angie. I've been a PM for
Angie, I'm sorry, your output on your microphone is so low, I can't hear what you're saying.
It is quiet, yes.
Another option here. Is that any better?
No.
Is the echo back? Okay, let's go with that.
Testing. The echo is back. Sorry.
Well, maybe if I'm the only one speaking, it won't be too bad.
Yeah, I'll mute myself.
Okay. Thanks. So I have been a PM for about 3 years now in advertising technology space. The company that I'm currently working with, we are starting to use AI with large language models and looking for insights across all of our data. We have a huge amount of PII and identity data that we deal with. So we're looking for insights in terms of, creating more value for our brand partners and their advertising campaigns.
Got it.
Sorry, I joined pretty late. Was the prompt just like an intro and kind of what we're looking to learn here? Is that about right? Okay, cool. Well,
And if you have an interesting anecdote about how you're seeing AI in your kind of day-to-day as a product manager, but yes.
sure. Yeah, cool. Well, hey everyone, my name is Ali. I'm currently a CPO at a seed stage startup in the mental health space. So I'm working with them to kind of build what mental health and AI could look like together. I think there's a lot of stigma in the space, a lot of security concern in the space. So I'd love to learn just more about how those two things can play together. And if you're at the forefront of a newer industry, like what does the launch plan look like? Just kind of curious, but I have worked in a couple different AI roles in the past. I worked in security, building like fraud models. I worked at Ticketmaster, building kind of like an account, forecasting analysis and things like that. But nothing really specific. But I would love to just listen in.
Ali, what did you say your industry was? I missed it.
I've been in a few different industries, honestly. Currently, I'm working in mental health.
Mental health, got it.
Yeah. Right. Thanks.
Hey, I'm Alex. Excited to join and listen in on what you all have to share. Been a PM for 4 years, most recently for a B2B e-commerce marketplace. Somewhat AI adjacent in one of the products I managed. The first product line was machine learning based product recommendations. And then of course I was part of a riff right as like this AI moment was really starting. So the way I've really been observing it is like through my Twitter feed and everyone talking about like vibe coding and vibe marketing and whatnot. And I'm about to start a new opportunity in a few weeks. So just would love to listen in and hear how people are using AI in their day-to-day to make them, smarter and better PMs. I'll be going into the healthcare space, working on a e-commerce marketplace for independent pharmacies to order from their wholesalers.
Cool.
Awesome. Also, congrats, Alex. It sounds like you accepted. I know you've been.
Yes, thanks. I accepted yesterday.
Cool. Awesome. That's a
awesome.
fantastic feeling.
Congrats, Alex.
Thanks, guys.
Cool.
How about you,
and
Max?
you all know me. I'm Max. I run Roadmap. I do early stage startup consulting around everything from product to strategy to cultural hiccups. And I'm super excited to pick Chris's brain on this too. I had a really interesting conversation, which I will share because it's quite relevant here, I think, last weekend with some sort of tech aficionados who were in town and at a gathering. And the sentiment seems to be that, and I'm going to take us in a slightly more abstract direction, or at least plant that seed than the four of you have thus far. But the sentiment seems to be that we're looking at AGI as like a functional thing in the next 5 years or so. Like it will be in the market, it will be working, it will be very real. And so I have not slept really since that event, thinking about what that means for all of us. But so Chris, you've now got the option to either go high level abstract theory or actionable strategy.
Yeah, that's interesting. What is AGI and why do we think about it, and what does it mean when it happens, and et cetera, right? Just to paint the picture on the other side of my life, my wife is pre-law right now, and she's busy taking an AI ethics class. And so she and I are constantly having that conversation, right? She's, the typical, and she's interested in governmental policy, right? So she wants, laws in place. And she, she interns with us, an Oregon state senator in the Oregon capital, Salem. And right now they're dealing with, laws for, Google and journalism content. They're like 10, they're in this session of laws is like from 10, 20 years ago, right? Is the stuff that they're dealing with. And so, the basic problem is that they're trying to, think about what it means to legislate this new technology, just like every new technology. But by definition, you can't legislate something until you know what the problems are going to be, right? And that's why the laws are always so late, right? Because essentially all technology does damage, right? Go all the way back to fire, right? Which is an extremely important technology still to this day, right? And has also been the cause of a great amount of harm and death in the world, in the 12,000 years since we invented it, right? So, the idea that somehow AI is going to be different from a technology point of view, that government agencies can get ahead of it and look into the future, and think about what the legislation needs to be before we even know what the consequences are going to be. I mean, there's a reason, right, why the legislation takes a while. And so her point of view is, well, then we should put a pause in the technology until we know what the consequences are going to be, which of course defeats the whole purpose, right? If you put a pause on the technology, and let's say you can't, right? But if you could, then of course you don't know what the consequences are because they don't happen. You just put a pause on the technology, right? Now, and of course, from a practical standpoint, at this point, AI and the impending AGI, whatever the sliding scale is, what that means has become a national security issue, right? I mean, we're not the only country on earth chasing AGI, and it is a widely held belief that whoever gets there first kind of runs the table, right? And so I don't know if that's true, but it is certainly the case that, like nuclear weapons and other technologies before it, if we're left without it when that happens, then we're definitely kind of in the lurch, right? So that brings up the idea of what does AGI look like and how do we think about it? I'm going to leave that to later because wow, there's so many more kind of pressing issues with the technology, and I heard it over and over. Liam said this, Angie said this, Ali said this. What does it mean to kind of apply AI in these, non-technical fields? Obviously, there's a lot of technology involved in all the fields we're talking about, but they're not fundamentally about technology. They're fundamentally about, insurance or advertisements or healthcare, right? These are kind of the verticals that AI is right now being aimed at, right? We started, of course, like all technologies, they start with computer scientists, right, banging things together in the lab, and they come up with something useful. And the very first thing they do is apply it to their own lives, right? How do we make developers' lives better? Because they're developers, right? So that's how they think about things. And then, right, the very next thing that happens is porn. And then after that, then we get to the rest of verticals, right? Financial systems and insurance and healthcare and government agencies and defense and et cetera, right? And that's the phase we are right now, right? We moved past computer science, we moved past porn. Now we're into the mainstream technologies. And the main questions I see in those fields are the ones you brought up today, which is, one, how do you adopt this technology? And two, how do you do so safely and securely, right? So how do you adopt it? Well, it is very different for these kind of mainstream adopters to adopt this technologies, these big enterprises, these big slices of our world to adopt these things than crazy garage weekend startup coders, right, who are just applying things and throwing it up on the wall and see what sticks, right? Because the industries that are willing, able, wanting to adopt these things are looking for making money or saving money, right? That's all the enterprises are into, right? How can I use this technology to make more money? Advertising, insurance, right? How do I use these technologies to save money that I'm spending today that I don't have to spend tomorrow because I've applied AI, right? Content generation, marketing, also advertising, right? That's really how to think about applying any new technology. And so when you think about AI, you look at it from those point of views. How can I use it to save myself money? And what does that mean? Well, it means, how do I reduce labor? How do I reduce resources, right? And the current set of AI, generative AI, does something that is unique compared to the old AI models. The old AI models, hey, look, here's a picture. Oh, that's a dog. Great, right? That would be, recognition. That's kind of, hey, here's a bunch of numbers. What's the next one going to be, right? Prediction, right? Recognition, prediction. Those are the old AI models. Generative AI is different in the sense that you can get new content, right? That content, primarily text, but also more and more audio, visual, video, right? And so suddenly the time we spend and the resources we spend, both in terms of hiring full-time employees and paying contract firms to do creative work, suddenly, hey, you can save a lot of money, right, by using generative AI to produce these things, right? Producing, in my space, in the community of developers, it's producing blog posts and images that go along with content and podcasts and talks at conferences and things like that. But of course, every industry has some creative things that go along with it. Obviously, marketing and advertisement, top of the list in terms of the kinds of generative kinds of things. And you want to do it in a way that is, much less expensive than it is today, right? Creatives are expensive folk, just like developers are expensive folk, and have uncertain time that it takes them to do these kinds of things, right? And again, reducing the amount of time is all about reducing the expense, while keeping the quality not necessarily high, but at the level where you need it to be, right? And being able to dial that quality up and down based on how much you're willing to spend and how much time you want to give it. So all of those are kind of the opportunity, which I'm sure that the folks on this call have all thought through all kinds of wonderful ways to be able to apply this technology. So now the question becomes, how do you realize those benefits? And there's lots of, hey, I can go to ChatGPT right now and get X, Y, and Z, right? And I can get, some marketing copy, and I can drop it in, and I can get, some pictures, some video. I can do all individuals at any of these companies can go and use these tools, but not without taking proprietary company data and handing it to these services, right? And sometimes that is proprietary company data. Hey, we're building a campaign for a customer. We're whether it's advertising or marketing, or we want to look at, we want some AI to analyze some trends in the insurance field. We've got a bunch of historic data. We've got a bunch of data that we'd like somebody to do some pattern recognition and generate some trends and help us understand what's going on with our data. All of that requires, let me hand you this data so that you can do something with it and give me something back, right? That's what makes it useful. Therein lies the problem, right? You're either handing proprietary corporate data off to OpenAI or Microsoft or Amazon or Claude, Anthropic, whatever, or you are somehow bringing that in-house, right? And the bringing that in-house is the hard part, right? Anyone can go to chat.openai.com, right? But doing so in a way that protects your company's proprietary data and protects the individual data, PII data, maintains privacy, requires some extra work, either from software developers that you hire or that work for your company, or IT administrators or something. Most of what there's two paths forward here in general. Beyond the Wild West, which I don't recommend, right? One path forward is simply putting one of these LLMs and some kind of a general purpose front end in front of it into a data center that is hosted in the cloud and part of a VPN, a virtual private network, right? So that your data, your corporate data, your PII, does not go out over the public internet, right? And so Microsoft, Azure, Google all provide services where you can get to these LLMs and their chat services via, a virtual private network, right? That is something that your corporation owns, right? That that data is not shared with other general purpose users. It doesn't go out over the public internet, right? So minimum, you must do that. Okay. But more and more, what's happening is each one of these verticals, there are vendors busy building software in that field. Right? I'm more familiar with what's going on in the legal industry simply because that's where the work my wife does. But there are vendors busy building kind of AI specific kinds of support for marketing, support for advertising, support for legal, support for healthcare, right? In a way that is both protected, right? So that your data doesn't go over the private internet, so long as you trust the vendor, right? But then it is also tailored to the workflows of the industries that you are working in, right? So instead of just going to some general purpose chat, you can go to, a piece of software that knows how to do, the kinds of things you do in marketing or advertising or healthcare or insurance or legal or whatever. Does any of that make sense? Does any of that resonate with folks? Yeah, and I'm sure each one of you at this point has started to become familiar with these companies that have started to either build new products in your space or probably more commonly adding AI to existing products in the space, right? Marketing 101 now, or version 2 now with AI, right? Whatever the marketing software is. So that's kind of how to think about it. And the general purpose rule is, when it comes to security and privacy and PII, is the same whether it's AI software or other software, right? Because people have been building and selling and buying and securing software, vertical pieces of software for all of these industries for as long as we've had computers, right? So this is nothing new. AI just happens to be another piece of the puzzle, and no more or less risky, in my opinion, than, hey, I've got a piece of software that manages my customer's PII. The fact that now I can dig through that and look for additional data to mine out of that PII with LLM tools is no more or less dangerous than any other tools that you can apply to that PII. Thoughts about any of that?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything that you said. We've already kind of gotten into that foray. We do have an LLM set up through on an AWS server. We're running everything, securely. Curious what your thoughts are on the build versus buy conversation, because I've got a team of data scientists. We can build whatever we want that they're capable of, but the reality is that model building is extremely time consuming.
Yeah, that one's interesting. At that point, you have a build versus buy decision at two levels, right? One level is the typical, hey, I can build versus buy the specific hunk of software that brings in databases and networks and storage and all kinds of other kinds of technologies. And and by the way, it could also bring in an LLM that happens to be in our VPN hosted on Azure or AWS or wherever it happens to be. So that's one level, right? The second level is, should I be training my own models? And that one actually has a couple of subtle kinds of distinctions, gradations. One, should you be training your old model for scratch? Absolutely not. You should not be doing that. I don't believe. No. All of these companies have been busy building these things and figuring out how to build these things, and they have whole teams of data scientists whose job it is to keep building these things and come out ahead of their competitors. You don't want to. The clients that I've worked with that have built their own have the results have been nowhere near what the public marketplace can produce. So I would not recommend starting from scratch.
A very quick question on that. Is that because of the talent that they have available, or is it, as you said before, just like it's just an opportunity cost question where it's like these other companies
It's just not their expertise to be top of the line when it comes to building an LLM, whereas the Llama team at Meta has been growing for multiple years, and they continue to pour money in billions of dollars. Very few enterprise companies that I know are willing to spend billions of dollars to produce their own LLM, right? So I would not spend any time doing that. Instead, you have a number of other techniques you can use. One is, thanks, Ali. I'll get you a question here in a second after I answer Angie's question. One is you can fine tune, right? You can take existing models, whether they're proprietary or open source, and you can fine tune them. The proprietary ones, you have to work with the vendors and pay extra money to fine tune them, but you can pour your data in and essentially tailor an LLM to your specific customer data, your specific use cases, whatever your specific use. The thing there is the open source models are getting so good so fast that I would start with one of those. I would start with Llama 4. I would start with, I know DeepSeek sounds scary because it's China-based, and I definitely would not point your employees at deepseek.com or wherever the endpoint is. Guaranteed all of that data is going right into the Chinese government, right? Don't do that. But there's no harm in downloading and fine-tuning their model, right? If that one proves to be good for you. So I would look at the latest crop of open source models, and Zuckerberg, for all his failings, seems to want to be the #1 open source model on the planet, and he's fighting head to head with Elon and China, and there's a host of very capable open source models that I would start with before I start plunking down money on fine-tuning proprietary models. Now, crank the knob down one more, and all of the models, whether they're open source or proprietary, are getting larger and larger context windows, which means that one of your employees wanders up and says, I need a thing, right? Pull the data in from here. That all of that, pull the data in piece, that's all becomes context, right? I type, a paragraph of something I want, and then, megabytes of data is pulled in as context, and you can pull in that context in a way that kind of fine tunes on a request by request basis, as opposed to having to fine tune individual models. Turns out to be real data science work. And if you've got a team of data science, fine tuning, an open source model makes a ton of sense. But if you've got just typical software engineers and you're building these systems for yourself, or even working with outside vendors, all of them are going to allow you to bring in extra context, and you can do that on a request by request basis. So there's a lot of knobs to turn there, but I would not start from scratch. Absolutely not. The work most I'd ever do is fine tune. Does that answer your question, Angie? Yeah.
Yeah, that's helpful. Thank you.
Allie, what can I do for you?
No, thank you for that, Chris. I do completely agree there. I think one of the concerns that I've had come up in the past, and this is kind of a bit from a startup perspective, I agree, like going out and building your model from scratch is kind of a reinventing the wheel to some degree kind of process. And so the analogy in my head is if I'm using like some text-based solution for my actual business prop, and I could go build that from scratch, or I could use Twilio, right? And so why would I go build all of that when that's not even the core value proposition of my business?
Yeah, there is the more fundamental question of how to make the build versus buy that I didn't go into, right? I think most PMs can make that decision.
Yeah,
right?
I think that's totally fair. So my concern is something like AI being like the core engine behind the scenes for the decisioning you're doing. Like, let's say you're a startup, like a VC may not value a chat GPT wrapper, right? But it's one thing for you to go leverage some third-party API. But if you're saying you're a AI company, but your engine is still third-party, that gets devalued. And so what are the like criterias to start thinking about when like AI is really like the core component of all of the different pieces in the background? Is it still okay to just say that's fine and that's how it is, and our value prop is more just about what tunings we do or what data that we specifically have? Like, is it fine to just be in that headspace, or should you in those cases start thinking about having proprietary models?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't believe so. Fundamentally, you're saying, hey, if I build something, how are my investors going to feel if I can just pull an LLM off the shelf to implement it, instead of doing all of the heavy lifting of building my own model or heavy duty fine tuning or whatever,
Right.
of my app? To which I will say, it has nothing to do with whether you built your own model to solve this problem or did heavy duty fine tuning, but rather once your thing is public, what your competitors have to do to duplicate your value, right? So it's really about what's the moat that you're building around your product. Why can you build this and no one else can, right? And that's the real problem with chat GPT wrappers is, once you show the world you can do X, Y, and Z, then anyone can do that, right? And in fact, there is a wonderful GitHub repo that collects all of the system instructions for all of the developer tools that are simply, essentially UI plus system instructions plus, backing up to some LLM or another, which makes it super easy to build your own knockoff developer tool, once such a thing has been demonstrated, right?
Mm-hmm.
And as is always the case, right, it isn't just because you happen to spend a lot of time and effort to build the thing, doesn't mean that that's your moat, right? Your moat often has to do with data you have access to that nobody else has access to.
Mm-hmm.
Because inevitably, once you've shown the world that X, Y, and Z is possible, then if anyone cares, right, if you're making money doing it,
Mm-hmm.
someone's going to knock it off, right? And of course, those folks are going to use whatever the quickest, easiest thing is, regardless of how hard you worked to build your thing.
I absolutely agree. Yeah. I love your point about the mo. I think that's completely valid. So you are saying that it's okay for that underlying tech piece, even if you're leveraging a third party, but the value of your data and you're giving a specific training set or that response head to head, because a very common question you're going to get is why not ChatGPT or something like that. So
That's right.
it's the value of your training set that should ideally be enough to prove out that value, I think.
Well, I mean, it's the value of, it's often that you have access to data that no one else has. I'll give you an example. When I worked at, I was a VP of product at SourceGraph, and they had, before they got into, before they got into building their own kind of, developer AI coding assistant, which they built kind of head to head against GitHub Copilot, right? Microsoft solution. They had spent 10 years building a scalable code search solution, right? So they had built the infrastructure to be able to take in literally tens of millions of lines of source code across dozens of computer languages and a dozen different providers, right? GitHub, Bitbucket, GitLab, etc., and bring it all together in a scalable way so that you had, and index it so you had instantaneous search results, right? Across tens of millions of lines of source code, which, cannot be matched by any single vendor, because these companies often don't have the luxury of saying, okay, we've got all this source code spread across all these different providers because of all the mergers and acquisitions we've done over the years. We can't spend a year migrating it all to this one or that one so we can have a consistent search experience and allow our software engineers the productivity of being able to have instant search results. So SourceGraph was there to say, doesn't matter where your code lives, we'll build on top of that, and we'll build all of these tools on top of all of that code from all these places. And then, of course, when I talk about context, when it comes to what is the right context to include in a AI coding assistant prompt, when you do something, that starts with a search. Well, guess what? They spent 10 years building search across tens of millions of lines of source code. So they uniquely had the ability to be able to do that search at enterprise scale to be able to feed into an AI coding assistant in a way that no other vendor could, right? Yeah. That's what made it possible for them to go toe-to-toe with GitHub Copilot, right? When it came to, enterprise-specific clients. So that's a moat, right?
What does that mean? What does that mean for startups, though, right? Because you're saying SourceGraph had this 10-year head start where they were gathering all of this data. Like, does that mean? Does that shift our paradigm even of what a moat looks like, right? For these newer AI companies where maybe it's more focused than it would have previously been from a venture value perspective on brand and customer relationships, or does that mean what is the implication?
Max, this is I understand I've just triggered you, right? Because this is your area of expertise, right? How do I provide help to startups, and what is their moat, and how do they differentiate themselves from established players or other startups? And I'll tell you the answer. It depends, right? Every single, in my experience, every single company that has gone from idea to success has a unique value prop, right? Every single successful company is successful because they had a thing that no one else had, right? Even the ones that are copycats that provide something that the original didn't have, whether it's lower price, faster, access to different data, addressing a different market in a way that nobody else, whatever, right? They have to have a unique value prop. And in my experience, the fine-tuned LLM is never the thing, because all of these big companies are busy building and practically giving these things away. In some cases, literally giving them away as a way to, grab mind share and market share at the expense of money. And there's just no way for a little startup to do better.
Yeah, I feel like what I've seen is, again, to Max, I think it's a great point that like getting data as a startup is so challenging, and so having that be the original moat could be difficult. I think you'd end up in a use case where you have, like a doctor who's like a specialist or something like that, and they just have tens of thousands of pictures of some scan or something that no
That's
one
right.
has access to or something. Like that would be a moat, right? And like they can make a determination of if someone has some condition that
That's
no
right.
one else or OpenAI could not do, right?
Yeah. In my experience,
Yeah.
it is almost never algorithms that are unique differentiators, because as soon as you release a thing that exhibits a particular implementation of an algorithm, somebody's going to figure out how you're doing it. That's just how that goes.
Yeah.
It's almost never an algorithm. It's almost always access to data that you uniquely have.
Yeah. I think the only other use case I've seen is if we're talking about the technology itself, then Chris, to your point, the models themselves, like these companies are going to continue to kill it and bring down the prices.
That's right.
Tuning or doing something specific, competing with that is going to be really challenging.
Yep.
I feel like if you look at like the latest YC batch, you're going to see a layer, like an application layer on top of that model that's a little bit more unique, like a specific agent that can handle certain tasks coordinated in different ways. And that's still built on top of those models, but that existing logic, if you were to manually do that, is still challenging to do. So just putting those components together, you've just kind of brick by brick built this moat of, hey, I can talk to Google Analytics easily, and I have OpenAI, and it can go from here to where and get that information. And so now you just added more and more pieces together that have understood a function.
Yeah, you're talking about integration, and that's something that, as an example, Microsoft has always been good at, right? They've been fast followers in a lot of or even slow followers in some cases in a lot of these markets, but they have this set of enterprise customers and enterprise applications that they've been building up over decades, and they're like, well, so then, all the Word documents and Excel spreadsheets and PowerPoint documents that all sit up on a SharePoint somewhere for your corporation, that is the unique data that they have access to. Every corporation that has adopted them, they have access to all of that data, and then they can continue to build tools and apps and services around that existing hunk of data. And so, for example, in the AI space, we are busy moving, this is top of mind for me, moving from kind of ask an AI to do a thing for me, generate some content that, based on this data, to agent mode in a lot of these things, which is do a thing for me. Right? Here's all the data. Here's my definition of done. Go and do it. Right? Which is a huge shift. And being able to, tap into, you can walk up to an agent and say, do a thing, and it can say, okay, well, I know I have access to all the data you have access to because you're a Microsoft customer and I'm a Microsoft agent, and now I can just dig through all of the data that I think is relevant to do the thing without you even saying anything, right? It's just there. It's part of the data I have access to. And now these companies have, again, data that you have access to. And so part of the kind of, as we move from ask mode to agent mode in the AI space, one of the things that has really unlocked that, mostly at the software engineering level, but I think this will start to show itself at the consumer level, is something called MCP. I don't know if any of you has heard of MCP. It stands for Model Context Protocol. And what it means is essentially you can configure these agents and say, hey, you want to get to my GitHub? Here's here's where my GitHub lives, and here's the credentials. You want to get to my email? Here's how to do that. You want to get to my internal corporate data? Here's how to do that. You want to get to the list of bugs that I'm fixing right now? Here's how to do that. And hey, you want to get to the state of my running application so you can poke at it and test it and see if it's doing what I said it was supposed to do. And if it's not, that gives you the data so that you can keep going until it does do what I say. Here's how to do that. Here's how to have access to my browser and push all the buttons as if you were a person. And here's how to have access to the developer tools inside my browser that shows all the errors that are happening so that you can fix them in my code, which is right over there, which I've also provided you access to. That's what MCP is for, right? And it unlocks that kind of upgrade from ask to agent, because the more data you give to an agent and the more possibilities it has, the more ability it has to go, okay, let me go and look over here and see, what's in the GitHub. Let me research this over here on the internet. Let me read more up on this bug. Let me see what the running app is doing. Is it, throwing errors? Let me find out what those errors are and where they might come from in your source code. Now let me fix that source code. Now let me run it again, right? That's where MCP is starting to make a huge dent in terms of software engineering and software development. But you can also see why, the equivalent of MCP for consumers level stuff. Here's my Google Docs. Here's my Microsoft Docs. Here's, this data. Here's that data. Here's my here's how to get to the database that keeps all of our, proprietary data for our customers, right? There's all kinds of, that's, again, as we move from ask to agent mode, that becomes an interesting thing. And so, Angie, you brought up, I think it was you who brought, oh no, it was Alex. Alex dropped off, unfortunately, who brought up this idea of vibe coding and vibe marketing. I don't know what vibe marketing is. I really want to know. I know what vibe coding is, right? I did that. I was doing that with AI for fun, right? I would wake up on a Saturday morning and go, gosh, I wish I had a piece of software that did whatever, right? I'm a big fan of the game Snake. I want Snake that has all these crazy features I've never seen implemented in the Snake game before. So I would go to ChatGPT and say, give me a implementation of Snake with these 10 features in my language of choice. And I would take that code. I wouldn't even look at it. I would paste it into my development environment and I would run it. And all the errors, I wouldn't even look at them. I would just take them and I would paste them back into ChatGPT, and it would go, oh, I see what the problem is. Let me give you the updated code. And I would take that and I would paste it and I would run it and I would keep doing that until, and then the runtime errors and the compile time errors would go away, but the behavior wasn't right. So I take a screenshot and I dump that in and go, no, not this, do this instead. And it would say, oh, I see what the problem is. Here's a bunch of updated code. I wouldn't even look at the code. I didn't care what was in the code, right? I was just looking for the behavior. That's what vibe coding is, right? Going back and forth. Now, when I'm building something that I care about, I don't do that. But if I'm, if I got an odd, hour on a Saturday and I feel like, I want a thing, that is a very fun way to get to it, right? So now, it's too bad Alex dropped off. I really want to know what vibe marketing is. Because how do you tell if there's an error in your marketing that you can just feed back into the AI?
It looks like it is agentic.
So I was building, I had an agentic workflow, right? With that before we had agents, right? Now I can do all of that in my developer tools and say, do a thing. And then it will write the code, and then it will, because it's in my developer tool, it will say, oh, there's the compile time errors. Let me fix those for you. Then I'll say run it, and it'll run it and say, oh, those are the runtime errors. Let me fix those for you, right? I mean, so that the agents can do a lot of that themselves these days.
I have an agentic question, maybe to close us out, unless there are any burning questions. So in an agentic world, especially the one that you just described, which is using an MCP to rope in numerous different sources of data and even avenues towards execution. How do you audit that? I mean, like right now, in a pre-AGI world, you really need a human in the loop, and at the point where your processes and your speed of execution have both improved, processes have gotten more complex and speed of execution has improved. How do you audit that how do you audit that? How do you have a human in the loop?
It is let me just say that is an unanswered question. Let me tell you, let me give you the next level, which is a lot of software engineers. So I've been talking to, I'm retired. I'm just a consultant these days, right? And so a lot of the code I write is for clients, or and they look at it, they review it on the way in using whatever means that they want. And I write my stuff for free, and it still matters to me what the code looks like. But in a world where, let me get philosophical, and then I'll reel myself in. In a world where you can just point your AI at whatever your code base is, and it will understand it and allow you to update it, whether that's fixing bugs or adding features, or even translating it into other languages in the not too distant future that might be more capable or more efficient or more secure or whatever. In that world, the way we audit things today doesn't even make sense, right? The way we audit things today is I write a bunch of code, a pull request or change request, but a bunch of changes, and I stick it in a queue, and then I tag other people on my team, and I go, will you take a look at this and make sure it's okay? And okay has different definitions depending on what organization you work for and what thing you're working on. But it'll often include, hey, are we using secure practices? Are we handling PII properly? But it'll also include things like, am I formatting the code correctly, right? Things like that. In a world where I don't even look at the code, don't even care what the code looks like, and I can just build the PR, and I'm like, oh, it does all the things I wanted it to do. Let me now drop it on the queue, and the other engineers could look at it and go, oh my God, this is so far off the mark from a code formatting point of view. What are you even thinking? And I'm like, well, what does that matter, right? The AI, the only people who care if it doesn't match the code formatting is the other engineers. AI doesn't care, right? It can just read the code. It could all be on one line. The AI doesn't give a shit, right? So, so that you start to call into question whether that even becomes a thing anymore, if code is primarily written and updated by agents. Because up until now, obviously, the reason we have code formatting is for other humans, right? Engineers to be able to understand it. And the reason we have frameworks, right, is to be able to capture code at various levels of a system, reusable libraries, and go, hey, this has all been debugged and tried and updated and bug fixed. Let me layer that into my system. I don't have to write that code anymore. In that world, in the new world, why do I need frameworks at all? Why don't I just write on whatever the lowest available API is? And then the agent can optimize it specifically for my use case, right? Why do I need a framework, right? Why do I need React when I can just go directly to HTML and CSS and JavaScript and the DOM API, right? Why do I need, umpteen, JavaScript frameworks? So, it starts to call into question all of these things that we are at this point still cargo culting that we may or may not need anymore. And then the other question is, okay, well, you put it in a queue for other engineers to review. Why is it other engineers that are reviewing it? Why isn't it other AIs? They're reviewing it. They know what the coding standards are. They know what secure. You can teach them what secure code looks like. You can run it. You can do penetrative testing on it. You can, you can set up all those tools. Why does it even matter whether engineers are looking at it anymore and reviewing your code? And the answer is because that is the way we have always done it. And we do not trust the AIs not to sneak some stuff in there.
Well, that's sort of my point, right? In a in a world in which hallucinations are still widespread within AI execution, like I guess your point is first of all, your point is that we need to bottoms up rethink the way that we do most things, which is blowing my mind. But your like more immediately actionable point is you just build in extra layers of
well, sure.
QA, essentially.
Ultimately, nobody, Angie doesn't care, Ali doesn't care, right? How the software is written, right? All they care is that it does what it's supposed to do in a secure, privacy enhanced way, right? They don't care what language we use. They don't care, whether it meets the coding guidelines, blah, blah, blah. They care that it works well.
Chris, thank you so much. This has been, as always, an absolute brain blast of an office hour.